Hi, everyone. My name is Bina Patel, and thank you so much for joining today. I'm here from Transformational Paradigms, and I'm going to quickly do a talk on transgenerational trauma and how it shows up in the workplace. Well, transgenerational trauma is effectively trauma that's passed down from generation to generation, and it's really severe enough that it changes the DNA. And most people who do have it don't even understand that they have it. So a common area where we find are people who are descendants from the slave era, or the people from who have been traumatized due, like Native Americans, like they were suppressed, they were forced to adapt into a culture, they were killed. Like it was very severe to the point that it's affecting people of 4 or 5 generations down. And whether people show up angry in the workplace, or they show up depressed, or they show up feeling down, we see that transgenerational trauma is becoming a real thing. And there's several triggers in society of that cause that sort of bleed over into the workplace. So for example, when we see transgenerational in the workplace, the way it shows up is effectively with people who are anxious. They're always mad, they're miserable, they're upset, they're very quiet, so quiet that they don't want to participate. They may come off as shy. And it could be a variety of things. It could be just their personality that they are this way, or that they've been taught to be this way, to be very minimal and to sort of make themselves thin, which is what Tracy McMillan Cottom talks about in her book, Thick or Thin. She talks about how we show up in the workplace because we're expected to fulfill a role. What we don't realize is that in transgenerational trauma, there's a psychological effect that's already in our DNA. Not only are we culturally taught as a norm to be quiet, for example, as a woman, a minority woman, let's say, but we are also taught from our household that if you speak up, you will be killed. And this is something you grow up with because your grandparents or your great grandparents have dealt with or had to deal with. Stories that have been passed on from generation to generation. They're now very, they're causing insecurities and fears within you that lead to anxiety, that lead to depression, that lead to fear constantly at a very chronic level. And this shows up in the workplace. And one of the best ways to mitigate or to help people who may be experiencing this is to really talk to them. So as a leader, as a manager, take the time to talk to them without stereotyping or assuming that they're difficult children, because this is what often happens, is that we miss out as managers and leaders of what is really happening. 90% of all that goes on in a person or who they are is beneath the surface. So what we see is not necessarily above the surface or at face value. We have to see what we see at face value and really start to dig deeper. Hire a conflict resolution specialist or hire an ombuds person such as myself to really help you understand and decipher how to mitigate these issues. You don't need to go to a crisis counselor necessarily. You don't need to go to a psychologist, although you can refer these people to go to and see them. But what a conflict resolution specialist can do is really understand how systemic issues in the workplace are impacting the performance of an individual or how they interact with one another in a team environment. So we look at systemic issues where there's a lack of trust, there's a lack of psychological safety, that they only want to speak to they only want to speak to conflict resolution specialists because we are a minority. Some of us are. Not all of us are minorities, but it could be a woman such as myself who comes from an Indian descent who they can relate to and they can talk to because it's easier to talk to them versus a majority or dominant race in the workplace. Okay. And our job here is to come in and help people understand how to effectively deal with these people who have transgenerational trauma, understand the symptoms of them, of what they show up with at work, and how to work around them so that they succeed in the workplace. Because sometimes we forego talent because they're difficult children, or we look the other way and ignore the difficulty, but really it's a cry for help. So as a conflict resolution specialist, I'm doing a lot of research and presenting at the American Psychology Association regarding this issue of how conflict resolution and conflict resolution specialists such as myself can really be an asset in mitigating transgenerational trauma, so much so that we create a healthy environment for the workforce and teach leaders and managers how to manage people who may be going through this without labeling them as difficult individuals. Okay? Thank you so much for joining.